Assalamu alaikum and welcome. Thank you very much for being here, for taking the time out on this somewhat cold December evening. There was, I don't know if it's still on or not, there was a program that lasted for probably 4 decades on BBC, and it was called Desert Island Discs. And every week, this magnificent host, Roy Plumley, the late Roy Plumley, he would invite a distinguished guest and ask them, if they were marooned on a desert island, what music would they carry with them? And people would name the song or the piece of music, and they'd talk about it and would play. And at the end, he would close by saying, and if you had to carry 2 books with you, what would you take with you? And when he put that question to Zia Sahab, Zia Mohyeddin Sahab, that is, Zia Sahab said, Diwan-e-Ghalib and the complete works of William Shakespeare. Today, I am happy, proud, humbled to say is our 30th year. And while I am seriously considering writing to the Guinness Book of World Records about this, I am also very happy that it has been a long, long journey, and we've reached this point. Now, I was discussing with Zia Sahab what we could do to make the 30th a little different, special, call it what you will. And he said, look, it's taken me a few years, but I have put together a presentation on Shakespeare titled, Why is Shakespeare Shakespeare? So I'd like to do that. And I said, by all means. Otherwise, you know how fist-clenched Urdu dedicated we are, but I'm speaking in English this time. I don't wish to keep Zia Sahab and yourselves waiting. His deep attachment and devotion to Shakespeare goes back to when he was a drama student at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, London, when he first saw Richard Burton playing Hamlet at the Old Vic. And he said simply, I was hooked. Ladies and gentlemen, Zia Mohyeddin.
Ask for the name of a writer of universally recognized genius, and the answer invariably would be Shakespeare. His contemporary Ben Jonson had claimed that Shakespeare was not of an age but for all time. His works have been hailed as the summit of perfection by the whole civilized world. Our own great poet Iqbal, in his poem titled Shakespeare, wrote, "Tujhko jab deeda-e-deedar talab ne dhoonda, taab-e khurshid mein khurshid ko pinha dekha. Hifz-e asrar ka hai fitrat ko hai aisa sauda, razdan phir na karega koi paida aisa." Roughly translated, it means, when the searching eye saw you, it looked at a sun hidden in its own brilliance. Nature would never again create another like you. But why is Shakespeare Shakespeare? Or rather, why is Shakespeare uniquely Shakespeare? One reason is that though he wrote his plays over 400 years ago, they still resonate with remarkable insight into what it means to be human. Pick any of his plays, the earliest grisly tragedy, Titus Andronicus, or The Winter's Tale, which was written much later, he is always in sympathy with human nature. You want to gain some understanding of jealousy? Read Othello. You want to know something about the art of seduction? read Richard III. You want to feel or know something about anguish, pangs of conscience, fear, read Hamlet. You want to find out something about the fate of kings? Listen to Richard II. Oh, for God's sake, let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings, how some were deposed, some slain in war, some haunted by the ghosts they have deposed, some poisoned by their wives, all murdered. For within the hollow crown that rounds the mortal temples of a king keeps death at court. Shakespeare crystallized thought into memorable sayings. There's no other writer who condensed ideas and feelings into unforgettable words and phrases. We use them every day without ever thinking that he was the one who first coined the phrase. What's done is done. 'Tis the long and the short of it. 'Tis neither here nor there. For goodness sake, what the devil is his name? Budge an inch, dead as a doornail. We have seen good days, tower of strength, the milk of human kindness, and on and on and on. Shakespeare's dramatic pattern lies not in the text, in the plot. It's in the substance of his writing. It's in the succession of episodes that mark the development of a story. It's in his constantly shifting narrative, constantly shifting subject matter, in irony and in wordplay. I'll give you one illustration of his wordplay. I once played Lucio the Fantastic. That is how he's described in the cast list of the play, Measure for Measure. Now, in this play, there's a young man, Claudio, who has been sentenced to death by the acting governor for having made his fiancée pregnant. Lucio is his friend, so he asks Lucio to do him a favor, to meet his sister, who is about to take holy orders, and persuade her to go and see the acting governor and plead for mercy. And he then goes on to speak 2.5 lines, which Richard Rhys, who was playing Claudia, didn't seem to be worried about, but I was. For in her youth there is a speechless dialect such as move men. I went up to the director, lovable man, Graham Murray, who knew his Shakespeare thoroughly well, and asked him what these lines meant. And he explained that the word prone means inactive, lying flat, in retirement, or with a lover. But in this instance, it also means active, whether to move men by her subtlety or her purity. Speechless will not give away whether she is shy or sly, and dialect is, of course, manner of speech. So what Claudio is implying is that when she, his sister, goes to meet the acting governor, she would inflame him with an image of her prone on bed, or move him with her shyness because she is a nun. Now these 2.5 lines would be so loaded with double meanings, I would never have grasped had I not been acting in the play. This evening I have picked some of his plays, a few passages from some of his plays, to illustrate briefly why Shakespeare, who was called an upstart crow by the literary establishment of his time, outshone all other dramatists of his age and several ages to follow, simply by the unique manner in which he unfolded melancholy, suffering, benevolence, oppression, venom, human failings, and human weakness. As You Like It is an elegantly constructed and finely finished of his comedies. The Duke, the King, that is, his throne has been occupied by a usurper. So the Duke and his entourage have taken refuge in the idyllic forest of Arden, where several romances blossom. Now, if you've seen this play, this delightful pastoral comedy, or if you've read the play, you would recall that towards the end, all misunderstandings are removed, all lovers are united, and multiple marriages take place. And when these festivities are going on, the news comes that the usurper has admitted his guilt and the throne has been restored to the banished duke. Everyone is blissfully happy because their exile is over, except for the melancholy character Jaques, who would rather go back to the forest, a cave in the forest, than return to the glittering life in London. This is Shakespeare's unique method of not allowing a complete comic resolution to always recognizing that there's some human temperament that would never be pleased and would indeed take pleasure in being displeased. It's the same Jaques who gives the oration of the famous 7 Ages of Man speech. Earlier, when the Duke tells him that there must be a lot of people living in conditions far worse than they are, he morosely observes, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances. And one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant mewling and puking in the nurse's arms, and then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail unwillingly to school. And then the lover, sighing like furnace, with a woeful ballad made to his mistress' eyebrow. And then the soldier, full of strange oaths and bearded like the pard, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth. And then the justice, in fair round belly, with good capon lined, with eyes severe, beard of a formal cut, full of wise saws and modern instances. And so he plays his part. The 6th age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloons with spectacles on nose, pouch on side, his youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank, and his big manly voice turning again into childish treble pipes and whistles in its sound. The last scene of all that ends this strange history is second childishness and mere oblivion. Sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. Julius Caesar is another neatly constructed tragedy which reveals personal ambition, political intrigues, and misguided idealism. The 3 men among whom Shakespeare divides the dramatic realm are Brutus, the idealist, Octavius Caesar, the egoist, and Mark Antony, the opportunist. Come to think of it, these 3 have held the world in dispute throughout the ages. Mark Antony is a dark horse. He remains in the shadow until Caesar has been murdered, and then humbly and tactfully requests Brutus to allow him to address the unruly mob that has gathered round Caesar's dead body. His aim becomes quite clear. He wants the citizens and the mob to create chaos and violence. His speech is a masterly exercise in political oratory and political chicanery. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. So let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus has told you that Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously had Caesar answered it. Here, under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, come I to speak in Caesar's funeral. He was my friend, faithful and just to me. But Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. He hath brought many captives home to Rome, whose ransoms did the general coffers fill. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious? But Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. You all did see that on the Lupercal I thrice presented him with a kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. Was this ambition? Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and sure, he is an honorable man. I come here not to disprove what Brutus spoke, but here I am to speak what I do know. You all loved him once, not without cause. What cause holds you then to mourn for him? O judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason. Bear with me. My heart's in the coffin there with Caesar, and I must pause till it come back to me. But yesterday the word of Caesar might have stood against the world. Now lies he there, and none so poor to give him reverence. O masters, if I were disposed to stir your hearts and minds to rage and mutiny, I would do Brutus wrong and Cassius wrong, who, as you know, are honorable men. I will not do them wrong. I rather choose to wrong the dead, to wrong yourself, and to wrong myself, than to wrong such honorable men. But here's a parchment with the seal of Caesar. I found it in his closet. 'Tis his will. Let but the commoners hear this testament, which, pardon me, I do not mean to read, and they will go and kiss dear Caesar's wounds, and dip their napkins in his blood, yea, beg a hair of him for memory, and dying, mention it within their wills, bequeathing it as a rich legacy unto their issues. The crowd is now clamoring for the will to be read out. The will. Read us the will. You will compel me then to read the will? Then make a ring about the coffin of Caesar. And dramatically, having stepped down from the pulpit, he tells them that Caesar, who has been so savagely murdered by Brutus and his gang, has in his will left each one of them 75 drachmas, and has allowed them free access to all his estates and parks. The crowd is now getting more and more incensed. And Antony, smooth as silk, Good friends, sweet friends, let me not stir you to such a flood of mutiny. They that have done the deed are honorable men. A triumphant mockery of the word honorable. The concluding part of Antony's speech is another stroke in chicanery. Now he makes a Machiavellian twist. I am no orator as Brutus is, but, as you know me all, a plain, blunt man who love his friends, that they knew full well who gave me public leave to speak of him. For I have neither wit, nor words, nor worth, nor utterance, nor action, nor the power of speech to move men's blood. I speak right on. I tell you that which you yourselves do know, show you dead Caesar's wounds, poor dumb mouths, and bid them speak for me. But were I Brutus, and Brutus Antony, there were an Antony who would ruffle up your spirits and put a tongue in every wound of Caesar, that they should move the stones of Rome to rise and mutiny. We'll mutiny, we'll mutiny, we'll mutiny, says the crowd. We'll burn Brutus' house. Antony smirks. Now let it work. Mischief thou art afoot. Take what course thou wilt. The crowd now leaves the forum. But the first victim, because they have gone to kill and plunder, the first victim of Antony's eloquence is not Cinna, the conspirator, but Cinna, the poet. He keeps protesting, I am Cinna, the poet, I am Cinna, the poet. Then kill him for his bad verses, shouts the crowd. And they tear him from limb to limb. This is the irony that I spoke about. And also, Shakespeare here tells us that the revolution can take a bizarre turn. "30 years after Shakespeare's death, King Charles I was dethroned and beheaded. After centuries, royalty in England came to an end. Cromwell, the Puritan, now took over the reins of the realm. One of the first things Cromwell did was to close down theatres in London, and they remained closed for the next 18 years. It was only with the return of King Charles II from France that the theatres were reopened, and, to the best of my knowledge, never closed down since. But now, in the Restoration period, the plays of lesser dramatists were performed twice as often as those of Shakespeare. This was because the opinion makers who had accompanied King Charles II were heavily under the influence of the aesthetic idealism of the French intellectuals, who believed that a tragedy should be written strictly in accordance with the rules codified by Aristotle. So they thought that Shakespeare was either ignorant, or he was ignorant because he had never attended a university, or he had wantonly disregarded the Greek method. Now, this method demanded that a tragedy should be written strictly in verse, because it was an elevated form of writing, that it should exclude all comedy or comedic moments, that it should not have a cast of more than 7 to 8 players, and it should adhere strictly to the 3 unities which prescribed that a play should have a single plot, a single location, and the action time scale of the action not to exceed 24 hours. Shakespeare completely disregarded the rules. the Aristotelian unities. His plays are not confined, his action is not confined to 24 hours. His plays have a cast of 25, 35, even 47 speaking parts. Nor does he restrict his action to one location. His plays are like the scenario of a movie. One scene in Rome, one in Alexandria. One scene in a palace, the next in a wilderness. So Shakespeare was judged to be artless. And other dramatists of that age began to rewrite his plays. Thus it was that a dramatist named Nahum Tate rewrote King Lear, in which Lear gets his throne back towards the end. Cordelia is married to Edgar. The fool, such an important part, is taken out of the play altogether. And everyone lives happily ever after. Amazingly enough, this emasculated version of King Lear, and not Shakespeare's Lear, was staged in England for the next 150 years. It was only in the 18th century that Shakespeare was restored, as it were. Then this was in spite of the efforts of a certain Dr. Baudelaire, who was a zealous spokesman of the Society for the Suppression of Vice in England. Dr. Baudelaire produced a volume with the help of his sister called The Family Shakespeare, in which he had cleansed Shakespeare by removing all those words and phrases and a lot of his prose, which he felt gave offense to the virtuous people. And this volume had many, many editions. You can imagine what might have happened had it not been for the very serious efforts of stalwarts like Addison, Dr. Johnson, Hazlitt, etc., who made sure that his text was restored. And it was. Now, I think what makes Shakespeare uniquely Shakespeare is his artlessness. But for his artlessness, we would not have had a Twelfth Night, A Midsummer Night's Dream, A Merchant of Venice, a Romeo and Juliet, an Othello, a Macbeth, a Coriolanus, a King Lear, or a Hamlet. Students who have to study Shakespeare as part of their text often tell me that they find his blank verse to be a terrible constraint. This is because they tend to read each line separately. Shakespeare says a lot of things all at the same time. He can be witty, he can be dramatic, he can be terrifying, all at the same time. Once you begin to learn to read a sentence without a pause, beyond the end of a line, what we call enjambment, you will get a far better insight into what he's trying to say. Lyrical poetry requires the same concentration of forces to convey the meaning of one word as it does a whole line of iambic verse. And once you realize that the words are not frightening, on the contrary, they are your delight, the text lifts you into a state of excitement. Shakespeare wrote mostly in what we call the iambic pentameter, a verse of 5 feet, which can be scanned very easily. It is, high hence, be gone, away, ti-tum, 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 ti-tum. But soft, what light from yonder window breaks, ti-tum. But you cannot come on the stage and act the line as, but soft, what light from yonder window breaks. You would be booed off the stage. So while you have to be aware of the meter, you must not be too conscious of it. This is something readers of our poetry in our part of the world, this is the gravest error that they make. They do not read the words, they read the meter. They might as well be saying din da din dum din da din dum din da din dum din da dum. Romeo and Juliet is a lyric tragedy. It's a love story. And like all love stories, the fate of the lovers is doomed. We know this. We know it before we watch the play, and yet when we watch it, we surrender to the passion and to the structure, its beautiful structure, and of course its superb love poetry. My bounty is as boundless as the sea, my love is deep. The more I give, the more I have, for both are infinite, says Juliet. And Romeo, I am no pilot, but wert thou as far as that vast shore washed by the farthest sea, I would adventure for such merchandise. How precious the word merchandise becomes in this context. Romeo falls in love with Juliet the moment he sets his eyes on her. They meet at a masked ball arranged by Juliet's father in his palatial home. They dance with each other. They exchange flirtatious but cryptic couplets. They part when the ball is over. But Romeo is now under a spell. Late that night, he enters Juliet's house, climbs the high orchard wall, and stands beneath her balcony. He jests at scars that never felt a wound. But soft, what light from yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who's already sick and pale with grief, that thou, her maid, art far more fair than she. Be not her maid, since she is envious. Her vestal livery is but sick and green, and none but fools do wear it. Cast it off. It is my lady, oh, it is my love. Oh, that she knew she were. She speaks, yet she says nothing. What of that? Her eye discourses. I will answer it. I am too bold. 'Tis not to me she speaks. Two of the fairest stars in all the heaven, having some business, do entreat her eyes to twinkle in their spheres till they return. What if her eyes were there, they in her head? The brightness of her cheek would shame those stars as daylight doth a lamp. Her eye in heaven would through the airy region stream so bright that birds would sing and think it were not night. See how she leans her cheek upon her hand. Oh, that I were a glove upon that hand, that I might touch that cheek. She speaks. Oh, speak again, bright angel, for thou art as glorious to this night, or being o'er my head, as is a winged messenger of heaven unto the white, upturned, wondering eyes of mortals that fall back to gaze on him when he bestrides the lazy, pacing clouds and sails upon the bosom of the air. It is at this point that he hears Juliet say, "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name. Or if thou wilt not, be but sworn my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet. Shall I hear more, or shall I speak at this? 'Tis but thy name that is mine enemy. What's in a name? A rose by any other name, etc., etc., etc." Within hours of their secret marriage, Romeo is banished from Verona because he has killed Tybalt, Juliet's cousin, in a fight. That night, he has to leave Juliet before the rise of dawn. Juliet doesn't want him to go. "Wilt thou be gone? 'Tis not yet near day. Was the nightingale and not the lark? It was the lark, the herald of the morn, no nightingale. Look, love, what envious streaks do lace the severing clouds in yonder east. Night's candles are burnt out, and jocund day stands tiptoe on the misty mountain tops. I must be gone and live, or stay and die. Yon light is not daylight, I know I. 'Tis but a meteor that the sun exhales, therefore thou needst not be gone. Let me be ta'en, let me be put to death. I'll say, yon grey is not the morning's eye, nor that is not the lark whose notes do beat the vaulty heaven so high above our heads. I have more care to stay than will to go. Come, death, and welcome. Juliet wills it so. It is high hence. Be gone, away. Divine poetry. Anti-Semitism was rampant in the Elizabethan era. So Shakespeare, when writing about the feelings of a man belonging to a ghettoized community, Shylock that is, had to be very careful and not make him too sympathetic, or else he might have been branded as a Jew lover, and that could have meant Shakespeare being thrown into the Tower of London. The original title of the play that we know as The Merchant of Venice was the title. The original title was The Comic History of the Merchant of Venice, otherwise known as the Jew of Venice. Now, Shylock enters the play a fully grown character. Many of Shakespeare's characters grow within the play, but he enters the play a fully grown character. And the first scene in which he confronts the highborn Antonio is a brilliant exposition of a lowly Jew laughing at Antonio, the worthy Antonio, who has publicly declared his hatred for Shylock. But Antonio is now in need of money. And so he and his friend Bassanio approach Shylock, and ask him whether he would lend them 3,000 ducats. Shylock toys with him. 3,000 ducats? Well, 3,000 ducats for 3 months? Well, 3,000 ducats for 3 months, and Antonio bound? Antonio is a good man. At this stage, Antonio becomes impatient and imperiously asks him whether he is going to lend them the money or not. Shylock can now no longer contain his emotion. Signor Antonio, many a time and oft in the Rialto, you have rated me about my monies and my usances. Still have I borne it with a patient shrug, for sufferance is the badge of all our tribe. You call me misbeliever, cutthroat, dog, and spit upon my Jewish gabardine, and all for use of that which is mine own. Well then, it now appears you need my help. Go to then. You come to me and you say, Shylock, we would have monies. You say so. You that did void your room upon my beard and foot me as you spurn a stranger cur over your threshold. Monies is your suit? Well, what should I say to you? Should I not say, hath a dog money? Is it possible a cur can lend 3,000 ducats? Or shall I bend low and in a bondman's key with bated breath and whispering humbleness, say this: "Fair sir, you spit on me Wednesday last. You spurned me such a day, another time called me dog. And for these courtesies, I should lend you thus much monies?" Nevertheless, he does. He does lend him the money, on the condition that if Antonio cannot pay it back within 3 months, Shylock would not charge any interest, but take a pound of Antonio's flesh. Antonio agrees. Time passes. 3 months are over. Shylock is now wrapped in resentful, sorrowful resentment. It's because his daughter has fled from the house and has taken all the valuables with her. But what galls him the most is that she has eloped with a Gentile. The only thought that gives him solace is that Antonio can no longer pay back his debt because his ships have been destroyed and he is a ruined man. And so, as he wanders through the marketplace, seething with frustration, a friend of Antonio's approaches him and taunts him about the pound of flesh. "What's that good for?" he asks. "To bait fish withal. If it will feed nothing else, it will feed my revenge. He hath disgraced me and hindered me 500,000. Laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains, thwarted my bargains, scorned my nation, heated mine enemies, cooled my friends. And what's his reason? I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, senses, dimensions, affections, passion, fed with the same food, hurt by the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? If you wrong us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you in the rest, we will resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his sufferance? Revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his humility be by Christian example? Why, revenge. The villainy you teach me, I will execute. And it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction. And so we get to the court scene in which the Duke, who is the presiding judge, keeps on urging Shylock to be kind and forgiving. Shylock's response is, "I have possessed your grace, or what I purpose, and by our holy Sabbath have I sworn to have the due and forfeit of my bond. If you deny it, let the danger light upon your charter and your city's freedom. You will ask me why I choose to have a weight of carrion flesh than to receive 3,000 ducats. I'll not answer that, but say, 'tis my humor. Are you answered? What if my house be troubled with a rat, and I be pleased to give 10,000 ducats to have it baned? What are you answered? Some men there are love not a gaping pig, some that are mad when they behold a cat, and some, when they hear the bagpipes singing in the nose, cannot contain their urine. For affection mistress of passion, sways it to the mood of what it likes or loathes. Now for your answer. As there is no firm reason to be rendered why he cannot abide a gaping pig, why he a harmless necessary cat, why he a woolen bagpipe, but of force must yield to such inevitable shame as to offend, himself being offended, so will I give you no reason, nor I will not, other than a lodged hate and a certain loathing I bear Antonio, that I follow thus a losing suit against him. The court is speechless. Shakespeare expresses through Shylock the feelings of a persecuted community. Shylock's final address to the court is a beautifully judged condemnation of a system that allows for inequality amongst its citizens. What judgment shall I dread, doing no wrong? You have among you many a purchased slave, which, like your dogs and your mules and your asses, you use in abject and slavish parts because you bought them. Shall I say to you, let them be free, marry them to your heirs? Why sweat they under their burdens? Let their beds be made as soft as yours, and let their palates be seasoned with such viands. You will answer, the slaves are ours. So do I answer you. The pound of flesh that I demand of him is dearly bought. 'Tis mine, and I will have it. If you deny me, fie upon your law. There is no force in the decrees of Venice. I stand for judgment. Answer, shall I have it? But of course he does not have it. He was never meant to have it. Shakespeare wrote Shylock as a mingy, sleazy old Jew who tries to rise above his station and gets his comeuppance. But he had the sensitivity and the humanity to express the crushed feelings of people who are now or were now treated as outcasts. And the remarkable thing is that he did it in such a way that it was possible for the subsequent generations to discover the voice of the outsiders, the excluded people. The uniqueness of Shakespeare was the quickness of mind and the fertility of imagination. He would pick up a book, a history book by Holinshed or Plutarch, and turn passages of it into a play, a tragedy, or a comedy. In his latest work on Shakespeare, Professor Jonathan Bate gives an excellent example of Shakespeare's compositional method. He quotes from a passage I want to quote that, and I've totally lost my place on where the quotation is. Comic resolution. Yes, he quotes a passage from Plutarch's Life of Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony as we know him. It's translated by Sir Francis North. Here's the translation. It's a passage which describes Cleopatra's pomp and majesty. I read it out to you. The poop whereof was of gold, the sails of purple and the oars of silver, which kept stroke in rowing after the sound of the music of flutes. And now for the person of Cleopatra herself. She was laid under a pavilion of cloth of gold, apparelled and attired like the goddess Venus commonly drawn in picture, and hard by her, on either hand of her, pretty fair boys, apparelled and painters, as painters do set forth the god Cupid, with little fans in their hands, with the which they fanned wind upon her. People ran out of the city to see her coming in, so that in the end Antonius was left post alone in the marketplace, in his imperial seat, to give audience. Now, Shakespeare picks up every bit of Plutarch's detail about the regal paraphernalia of the barge and the majesty of Cleopatra, and then with luscious and delicate strokes draws a picture, and it is Enobarbus, Antony's battle-weary lieutenant, who describes the scene. The barge she sat in, like a burnished throne, burned the water. Her poop was beaten gold, purple the sails, and so perfumed that the winds were lovesick with them. The oars were silver, which to the tune of flutes kept stroke, and made the water which they beat follow faster, as amorous of their strokes. For her own person, it beggared all description. She did lie in her pavilion, cloth of gold, of tissue, or picturing that Venus where we see the fancy outwork nature. On either side her stood pretty, dimpled boys, like smiling cupids, with divers-colored fans in their hands, whose wind did seem to cool the delicate cheeks, which they did blow. And what they undid, did. Her gentlewomen, like the Nereids, so many mermaids, tended her the eyes and made their bends adornings. At the helm, a sea seeming mermaid's tears, the silver tackles swell with the touches of those flower-soft hands that yearly framed the office. From the barge, a strange invisible perfume hit the sense of the adjacent wharves. The city cast her people out upon her, and Antony, enthroned in the marketplace, did sit alone, whistling to the wind, which, but for vacancy, had gone to gaze on Cleopatra too, and made a gap in nature. This is heady, gorgeous, voluptuous poetry. Poor Antony, sitting on his throne, abandoned and reduced to the status of a mere spectator of Cleopatra's majesty. That love and pain have something to do with each other is something which Shakespeare developed later in the play, when Cleopatra compares the stroke of death to a lover's pinch, which, as she says, hurts and is desired. Lazzat-e azar. We, in our part of the world, in our Urdu poetry, we have hundreds of thousands of couplets on the theme of hurt and the desire to be hurt. In Cleopatra, Antony and Cleopatra, Shakespeare gives us a picture of a self-torturing soul, Mark Antony. The Mark Antony of Julius Caesar is now a middle-aged general, worldly wise, and a supreme military commander. His pain, his love for Cleopatra, his passion for Cleopatra is his ruin. This play is full of dramatic poetry. But for subtlety and brevity, I have picked the 6.5 lines spoken by Cleopatra when a messenger informs her that Antony is dead. Oh, see, my women, the crown of the earth doth melt, my lord. Oh, withered is the garland of war. The soldier's pole has fallen, and young boys and girls are level now with men. the odds is gone, and there is nothing left remarkable beneath the visiting moon. Now, on the surface, this sounds like ecstatic nonsense, but there's enough meaning in it for us to feel that there might be a little more. And it gives us to perfection the reeling agony of Cleopatra. I turn now to a play which is about a man whose tragedy is within himself. I mean Hamlet, of course. A masterpiece of masterpieces. Hamlet, whenever we see Hamlet, he is lost, wrapped up in some kind of a morbid self-pity. Not always. Not always. Hamlet it's very difficult for me to describe the effect Hamlet has on me, but the first of the 7 soliloquies by which we come in contact with Hamlet's mind is an exceptional number. As I said, he is stricken with grief. It's only a month since his father's death, a month into which his mother has rushed into marriage with his father's brother, his uncle. Hamlet is full of anger and disgust. He doesn't know yet that his father has been murdered by his brother. His helplessness and loneliness knows no bounds. Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. Or that the everlasting has not fixed his canon against self-slaughter. Oh, God. God, how stale, weary, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. Fie upon't. Fie. 'Tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. That it should come to this, but 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not 2. So excellent a king that was to this Hyperion to a satyr, so loving to my mother that he might not beteem the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Heaven and earth must I remember. Why, she would hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on. And yet, within a month, let me not think on't. Frailty, thy name is woman. A little month, or ere those shoes were old with which she followed my poor father's body like Niobe, all tears. Why, she, even she, oh God, a beast that wants discourse of reason would have mourned longer, married with my uncle, my father's brother, but no more like my father than I to Hercules. Within a month. Yet the salt of most unrighteous tears had left the flushing in her galled eyes. She married. Oh, most wicked speed to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. It is not, nor cannot come to good, but break my heart. For I must hold my tongue. Whenever we see Hamlet alone, he is lost in some kind of a suicidal despair. And when he questions himself, he has to admit that he knows nothing of himself at all. But he's not just a morbid young man, ever lost in self-pity and self-delusion. He can be witty. He can be quick on the uptake. When he has the mask of madness on, he is a comedian. He talks in riddles, he makes puns. But when he takes the mask off, as when he is with his best friend Horatio, or when he is with the actors whom he loves, because they are the best chroniclers of our time. Then we see an untroubled Hamlet. Hamlet loves the actors, but he does not love their bombastic style of acting. So Hamlet's speech to the actors, which was written 431 or 432 years ago, is as valid today as it was then. It's a speech in prose, and I think it's probably the longest speech he ever wrote in a tragedy he ever wrote in prose. Speak the speech, I pray you, as I pronounced it to you trippingly on the tongue. But if you mouth it, as many of your players do, I had as lief the town crier spoke my lines. Or do not saw the air too much with your hands thus, but use all gently. For in the very torrent, tempest, and I may say whirlwind of your passion, you must acquire and beget a temperance that may give it smoothness. Oh, it offends me to the soul to see a robustious, periwig-pated fellow tear a passion to tatters, to very rags, to split the ears of the groundlings, who for the most part are capable of nothing but inexplicable dumb shows and noise. I would have such a fellow whipped for o'erdoing termagant. It out-Herods Herod. Pray you, avoid it. Now, be not too tame neither. Suit the action to the word to the action, with this special observance that you o'erstep not the modesty of nature. For anything so overdone is from the purpose of playing, whose end both at the first and now was and is to hold as 'twere the mirror up to nature, to show virtue her feature, scorn his image, and the very age and body of time, his form, his pressure. Now, this overdone, or come tardy off, though it make the unskillful laugh, cannot but make the judicious grieve, the censure of the which, by your reliance, always a whole theatre of others. Oh, there be players, and I've seen them play, and heard others praise, and that highly, not to speak it profanely, that neither having the accents of Christians, nor the gait of Christian, pagan, nor no man, they have so strutted and bellowed that I have thought one of nature's journeymen had made men, and not made them well. They imitated humanity so abominably. And let those of you who play your clowns speak no more than is set down for them. For there be of them that will themselves laugh, to set a barren quantity of spectators to laugh too, though in the meantime some necessary question of the play be then to be considered. That's villainous, and shows a most pitiful condition in the fool that uses it. Go, get you ready. Hamlet is under oath to avenge his father's death. So why does he delay? One answer is that if he does not delay, there would be no play. But this is a glib answer. The fact is that it's a wonderful achievement on Shakespeare's part to make the very delay dramatic, to turn the inaction into action. Hamlet is sunk in apathy. Shock and strain has dulled his feelings and weakened his resolve. And in the background, excusing the weakness, is doubt about the spirit that he has seen. Hence, his most impassioned soliloquy. God be with you. Now I am alone. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I! Is it not monstrous that this player here, but in a fiction, in a dream of passion, could force his soul so to his own conceit that from her working all his visage wanned, tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect, a broken voice, and his whole function suit him with form to his conceit, and all for nothing. For Hecuba. What's Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba, that he should weep for her? What would he do had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have? He would drown the stage with tears, confound the ignorant, make mad the guilty, and amaze indeed the very faculties of eyes and ears. Yet I, a dull and muddy-mettled rascal, peak like John o' Dreams, and can say nothing. No, not for a king, upon whose dear life and property a damned defeat was made. Am I a coward? Who calls me villain? Breaks my pate across? Plucks off my beard and blows it in my face? Gives me the lie of the throat? Who does me this, huh? Zoons, I should take it. For I am pigeon-livered and lack gall to make oppression bitter. Or ere this I should have fatted all the region kites to make this slave's offal. Oh, bloody, bawdy villain, remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, kindless villain. Oh, vengeance! Why, what an ass am I! Aye, sure, this is most brave, that I, the son of a dear father, murdered, prompted to my revenge by heaven and hell, must like a whore unpack my heart with words, and fall a-cursing like a very drab, a scullion. Fie upon't! Oh, fie! I have heard that guilty creatures sitting at a play have by the very cunning of the scene been struck so to the soul that presently they have proclaimed their malefactions. For murder, though it hath no tongue, will speak with most miraculous organ. I'll have these players play something like the murder of my father before my uncle. I'll observe his looks. I'll tempt him to the quick. If he but blench, I know my course. The spirit that I have seen may be the devil, and the devil hath power to assume a pleasing shape. Yea, and perhaps out of my melancholy and my weakness, as he is very potent with such spirits, abuses me, to damn me. I'll have grounds more relative than this. The play is the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. Hamlet is confined to the castle. He is constantly spied upon. Thinker that he is, he finds the world to be nothing but a sterile promontory. The sun, the golden fire, he thinks is a pestilential congregation of vapors. He calmly deliberates upon death, his own and the hereafter. It is in this frame of mind that he speaks the world's most famous soliloquy. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing, end them, to die to sleep no more. And by asleep to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of? Thus, conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. The soft Juno, the fair Ophelia, nymph, in thy orisons be all my sins remembered. Shakespeare does marvels with Hamlet, who is neither sane nor mad. He's a man at war with himself, as we all are at times. And this is why we identify with him. There's a Shakespeare, there's a Hamlet in all of us. But yet he is not like all of us, because he has that special passport that enables him to travel through the twilight regions of the soul. Hamlet's adventure, which leads him to defeat, is heroic too. He has flung his whole life, weakness no less than strength, the best of him and the worst of him, into the trial of his life, and what emerges is his nobility. Just before the final duel with Lear, his dearest friend Horatio keeps urging him not to accept this challenge. You will lose this wager, my lord. Hamlet is serenely calm, not a whit. We defy augury. There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. In the beginning of the 20th century, I must be allowed to look at the text which I need to quote. In the beginning of the 20th century, Count Leo Tolstoy, the venerable octogenarian, author of War and Peace and Anna Karenina, launched a scathing attack on Shakespeare. Before setting himself down to write his condemnation, he read Shakespeare's plays once again. He had already read them in German, in Russian, and in the original English. But if at first he had thought that Shakespeare's works were bad and trivial, this time, and I quote from his work, I felt not bewilderment, but firm and indubitable connection that the unquestionable glory of a great genius which Shakespeare enjoys and which compels writers of our time to imitate him, and readers and spectators to discover in him non-existent merits, thereby destroying their aesthetic and ethical understanding, is a great evil. His wrath fell mostly on King Lear. He hated the play, hated all the characters in the play. The paganism of the play blinded him to any virtue the play might have had. Jonathan Bate, in his essay on Tolstoy, writes, Tolstoy wrote his condemnation when he was, like Lear, fourscore and upward. He had a mane of white hair and a long white beard, and he looked more like Lear than King Lear himself. Tolstoy had no tolerance for any novel or drama which wasn't linked with Christian mercy. Since Tolstoy had become King Lear, he was bound to resent Shakespeare for having created King Lear. King Lear was unbearable to him because it foreshadowed his own death, his own tragic end. Now, as you probably all know, Tolstoy did have a truly tragic end. More than 82, or nearly when he was 82, he renounced his title, relinquished his estates, and with the only faithful daughter he had, Tolstoy decided to trek through the vast steppes of Russia to feel, like King Lear, what the wretches feel. He died at an obscure railway station, like Anna Karenina. King Lear is a momentous play. It's a giant of a play. It's the most cathartic play that I have ever seen. It's a play that explores Lear's agony, his spiritual death, and his resurrection. Thrown out by his daughters from their dukely homes, Lear, pitiful and drenched, walks into a raging storm. And that is the time when he gives us that tremendous speech. Blow, winds, and crack your cheeks. Rage, blow. You cataracts and hurricanos, spout till you have drenched our steeples, drowned the cocks. And you sulphurous and thought-executing fires, vaunt couriers of oak-cleaving thunderbolts, singe my white head, and thou all-shaking thunder, strike flat the thick rotundity of the world. Crack nature's molds, spill all Germans at once that make ingrateful man. Rumble thy bellyful, spit, fire, spout, rain, nor rain, wind, thunder, fire are my daughters. I tax you not, you elements, with unkindness. I never gave you kingdom, called you daughters. You owe me no subscription. Then let fall your horrible pleasure. Here I stand, your slave, a poor, weak, infirm, and despised old man. But yet I call you servile ministers that will with two pernicious daughters join your high-engendered battles against a head so old and white as this. Oh, 'tis foul. This is dramatic poetry incarnate. Granville Barker, who has written the most definitive, I would say, essays and prefaces to Shakespeare's plays, quite rightly observes, it is not the sound of thunder that stirs. What stirs, what moves us is the storm brewing within Lear. The force lent by his fellowship with it to the storm devouring his mind is what gives the scene its power. Shakespeare gives the actor an opportunity to impersonate both Lear and, reflected in Lear, the storm. This is why we say that a Shakespeare play has a performative truth. In the storm scene, and even before that, Lear's language is trenchant, strident, full of venom. But in the last act, when he has a reunion with his only daughter that loves him, his language acquires the elegance of simplicity. Where have I been? Where am I? Fair daylight, I am mightily abused. I should e'en die with pity to see another thus. I know not what to say. I will not swear these are my hands. Let me see. I feel this pinprick. Would I were assured of my condition. Pray do not mock me. I am a very foolish, fond old man, fourscore and upward, not an hour more nor less. And to deal plainly, I fear I am not in my perfect mind. Methinks I should know you, and know this man. Yet I am doubtful, for I am mainly ignorant what place is this. And all the skill I have remembers not these garments, nor where I did lodge last night. I know not where I did lodge last night. Do not laugh at me, for as I am a man, I think this child to be my daughter Cordelia. Tears are shed. Lear begs forgiveness of her. But before they can celebrate their reunion, Cordelia is wrenched away, taken to a prison, and murdered. And in the last scene, Lear enters the play, the stage, with Cordelia in his arms. Howl, 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 howl. Oh, you are men of stones. Had I your tongues and eyes, I would use them so heaven's vault should crack. She is gone forever. I know when one is dead and when one lives. She is dead as earth. Lend me a looking glass, if that her breath will mist or stain the stone, why then she lives. Why should a dog, a rat, a horse have life, and thou no breath at all? Thou'lt come no more. Never, 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 never. In my view, there's nothing more sublime than Shakespeare. I thank you.